Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric. I got a fun and exciting episode for you guys this Friday, because once I started talking about PlayStation 1 based arcade boards, everyone wanted to see exclusive videos on all the different boards I showed in that compilation at the start of the PlayStation 1 arcade series. I'll leave a link to that playlist below if you haven't seen it yet. And today I wanted to talk about my favorite PlayStation 1 based arcade board, and that is the Konami GQ. It runs one game and one game only, and that game is Crypt Killer. It's an awesome board. It's got a lot of changes from my base PlayStation 1, and we're going to talk about them today. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. And yes, this is main footage, I'll explain why in just a few moments. But taking a look at the Konami GQ board, this is the biggest PlayStation 1 board I have seen. Obviously the G-Net has more boards on it, but the overall footprint of this thing is just massive. It is one big slab of PlayStation 1 glory. And while it does have both of the Sony chips on board, this has additional RAM as well as additional silicon that handles some of the sound components that would not at all be on a PlayStation 1 console of any model or generation. Taking a look at the board here though, it's obviously JAMA, so it makes it very easy for home collectors to use. There are some faults on this board that can occur, and I'll explain those in just a moment, but you will see here the standard Sony CPU, and it is clocked at the exact same clock speed as a traditional PlayStation 1, which isn't always the case because some of the Namco and Capcom PlayStation 1 based arcade boards would increase the speed of the two PlayStation chips, in some instances getting from 33 MHz to 66 MHz, but this has the same traditional chips that you would see on a PlayStation 1 running at the exact same clock speed, but there are chips that you would never see on a PS1, one of them being the Motorola 68000 here. This is working in conjunction with the SPU to do audio handling on the Konami GQ board for Crypt Killer, along with some Konami custom chips as well. In a lot of ways, this is basically a PlayStation 1 with an entirely different setup duct tape to it, compared to a PlayStation 1 you just open up as a console, or something like the Konami GV, which is exactly the same as a PlayStation 1 home console, just with a SCSI CD-ROM drive versus a proprietary format. It's really interesting how many different variations Sony was able to create with developers for arcades, but you'll see here on the GQ board for Crypt Killer, there are so many different chips on board. This is basically a giant slab of PlayStation 1 with so many additional products put on it. And interestingly enough, the SCSI controller here is made by NCR, National Cash Register, so it's very possible you'll go to a store this week and make a transaction, and there might be a chip from the same manufacturer in there that might be doing something similar. I would assume SCSI is probably dead in most retail markets. Now on the RAM side, this does have more RAM than a PlayStation 1, so it is more capable. That's usually what happens with a lot of the arcade boards, RAM does get increased. Now taking a look at the front, just like pretty much every other Konami board, there's so many unpopulated areas here, and I really have absolutely no idea what the functionality of this would have been. It is very interesting to develop an entirely brand new arcade board, release one game on it, and never do anything again, so I'm kind of presuming on the left there may have been a header for analog controls. Maybe there's some racing games planned for this. And then we just have some other pin headers as well here for some general I/O, and then of course we have JAMA, which is going to handle everything else. Now taking a look around the board, you're going to see these three 5-pin connectors. This is a 3-player light gun game, and this is going to be for player 1, player 2, and player 3. There's going to be a custom BIOS on board, as well as a ROM chip that's going to have the gunshot sound effects, so they are not loading in every single time. Now this was a shotgun based game, and I do have one shotgun, although this is intended for Evil Knight and not Crypt Killer, but they are identical outside of the plastic. It's got a great pump action, and I love having stuff like this in my collection. Compared to using a Konami Justifier in a PlayStation 1, holding that big plastic shotgun in your hand absolutely is amazing, and I have this set up for both Crypt Killer and Evil Knight. And in my opinion, you 100% need the plastic shotgun, because when you're using the Justifier on a PlayStation 1, it does not sell the illusion of gunning down zombies the same as this does. Now taking a look at the other end of the board, there is a 6-pin header here labeled CN1 or connector 1, and that does not show up on my manual or schematic whatsoever, so I have no idea what that does, but obviously the plan was to have more than one game on this arcade board. But Konami loved making new arcade platforms. They have 3 arcade boards based on the PlayStation 1 alone, all with slight changes. It just seemed like the developers and engineers there, anytime they had a chance to think about making a new custom board, they had to take it. And this does have the Konami riser boards on them as well, with capacitors and different chips. These can be prone to failure, these ladder resistors over here in the package or those chips there. Some makers do reproductions of them, but that is one of the most sensitive areas of these boards. You'll just see the fins here for the sound amps, and this is going to be part of the entire sound component of the board. Just be careful of these, always check the capacitors. They do tend to go bad every once in a while. But what really goes bad on a Konami GQ board for Crypt Killer is going to be the SCSI hard drive. It's very interesting to use hard drives in an arcade setting. They're constantly spinning, they're constantly accessing, and that means they more often than not end up dying due to wear and tear in their old age. And that's exactly how my Crypt Killer board came to me. It was dead on arrival. I bought it that way and I figured I could probably repair it. And the reason I thought I could repair it is even though SCSI hard drives are very hard to find, we do have alternatives. There's a part loose in that drive. What I have done is I've converted this board over to a SCSI to SD emulation device. This is made for a PowerBook and it has a laptop pin pitch, which is what Crypt Killer is using, a laptop hard drive, and these little guys right here are worth their weight in gold for arcade repair. They are programmable via USB. You can set partitions, you can set master versus slave. They make all the difference in the world, and they replace these hard drives in pretty much any arcade unit whatsoever. And I did a video 3 years ago talking about how this is done. It is a relatively complicated process, but it 100% works, and it does allow you to revive these arcade boards. It is not every arcade board that uses SCSI, some use IDE, but using solid state replacements for any arcade board that has a dead hard drive is 100% the way to go. It's going to make the board last a lot longer, because you'll see here with the SCSI to SD on there, the media diagnosis and program loading works perfectly fine compared to originally when this board would not load whatsoever, and we're 100% able to get into Crypt Killer. The only reason that I don't have a direct capture of this is because I have to tap RGB and sync out of my PVM, and something about this hardware and the FrameMeister don't play well together. Every time there's a flash on the screen, the FrameMeister loses sync. But you'll see here with that SCSI to SD, one end of the cable goes into the GQ board, and the other end connects right to that SCSI to SD, and when you power it up, the board thinks it has a spinning SCSI hard drive in its place. I would put this down with some standoffs, but the cable length just ends up basically putting tension on the solder joints, so I kind of just let this thing raw dog it there. Seems to work fine for what I'm doing. And taking a look inside of the hard drive, guys, never do this if you could potentially recover data. Crypt Killer's been dumped, so I have no issues doing it, but never open up a mechanical hard drive. You'll already see I got a thumbprint on the platter. The entire ARM assembly that reads the data here is 100% frozen, and there's a part loose underneath that metal plate there. Something on the ARM actuation broke completely, and that is why nothing was ever able to load. The ARM's locked in place. This hard drive was dead a long time ago, but it is fun to open it up and show you what a mechanical hard drive looks like. And that's why a lot of games that use mechanical hard drives in the 90s in arcades are being sold as is, not working. 9 times out of 10 the hard drive is dead. And it is really interesting that Konami went with a hard drive because obviously the PlayStation 1 uses optical disc, which is a much preferred way to play back in the day. And the reason why I think it's weird that they chose a hard drive versus an optical disc is because they already had SCSI CD-ROM technology available to them on PlayStation 1 in arcades. Because when I showed you the Konami GV teardown, and I'll leave a link below if you haven't seen that yet, and there is a SCSI CD-ROM drive available to use, and honestly, hard drive versus spinning CD-ROM drive, it's probably going to last a little bit longer, and it's going to be cheaper to replace than that hard drive, so it is a very weird situation. But everything about the Konami GQ is a weird situation because they developed an entirely gigantic arcade board based on PlayStation 1 with custom hardware dealing with some of the sound portions, extra RAM, and they ended up doing only one game on it, but good thing it's Crypt Killer because I absolutely love the game. And if you do want to collect this and you don't have that shotgun, it does work with standard guns for arcades. It'll also work with a HAP 45 replacement. You can pretty much use whatever you want, and Konami was smart. You don't have to pump to reload. You can aim off screen. That's because in arcades, if the pump broke, they wanted a secondary way for the game to function without being completely dead. But of all my PlayStation 1 arcade boards, the Konami GQ is just an absolute beast of a platform, just in its footprint alone. I love the size, I love the scale, and I love everything about collecting all of these PlayStation 1 boards. And this was the last one I had to show you in this entire kind of like when I felt like it series, because you guys wanted to see more PlayStation 1 arcade hardware, and I'm happy to oblige. But if you ever see a Crypt Killer out there for sale cheap, and it says it's not working, and it shows you it boots, and the media diagnosis screen does nothing, that means it is a very quick and easy fix with a SCSI to SD. And if you ever need any help with that, leave me a comment down below, contact me somehow, and I will show you exactly how it is done. Short of that, I love Crypt Killer, I love arcade hardware, and I love the PlayStation 1. Hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.